is Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a card using Hello Bluebird's Tree Neighbors, Party on the Farm, and Cake Time. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on two separate panels. I'm going to be working on the ones with the critters first, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with my bear, and for him I decided to go with a brown bear. I'm using E53, E55, and E57. I'm going to start with that E57. I prefer to color darkest to lightest in almost all cases. So I'm going to do my shadows with that E57 first, just laying them in down the back of his body. I'm going to do his shadows a little bit differently on his head because his head is facing completely forward while his body is turned toward the right. So for his head, I put the shadows equal on both sides, and then I also did put just a little bit of extra shadow on the right side of his muzzle since his body is facing that way, and kind of tipped down a little bit. So once I have that E57 laid in, I'm going to start to blend that out with the E55, just making sure to grab the edge of the previous shade, that E57, and pull that darkest color into the mid-tone so I get a nice smooth blend between those shades. And then I'm going to repeat that process when I come in with the E53. Just making sure that I go over the edge of the E55, not completely over all of the E55, but just the edge, so you get that nice smooth transition and it leaves behind less harsh lines. Also, I'm going to be doing a second layer. I'm going to do it off screen today because there is quite a bit of coloring to do, and I wanted to keep the video manageable for you guys to watch. So I will do the second layer off screen, but that also really helps to smooth out the blend. You can see I've done it now. And then I'm going to bring in E51 to put the muzzle and the belly and make them just slightly lighter. I'm going to stick with those E50s for now, but I took away the darkest two shades and added in the E50, and I'm going to do the bunny. So I'll have a nice light buff colored bunny. So I'm using the E53 for my shadows now, and again putting the shading down the left side of the body since he is facing toward the right. I also want to keep his face pretty nice and light, so I'm going to get really soft as I get around his muzzle, and then even leave some of that just to be the plain white cardstock. And then once I'm done with that, I decided to also add a little bit of the E51 and E50 to the belly and tail of my opossum. I'm going to do a little bit of a pink tone on top of this later on, but to make it look a bit more natural, I wanted to have this kind of light shade underneath this kind of tan shade. So I did that on the second part of his tail as well. That's what that little squiggle right above him is. It's the extra part of his tail. I'll explain that a little bit more later on. But moving on to the rest of his body, I decided to go with E70 and E71 blended out with W1 for the lightest shade in that combo. So the E71 is my darkest, and now I am flipping my shadows. He's a little bit different because he's upside down, but he's also facing toward the left. So I'm flipping my shadows a bit to reflect that. Starting with that E71, like I said, and then blending out with the E70, and then using the W1 for the highlight. For my raccoon, I decided to keep the W1, add in the W3 and the W00 for the lighter parts of his body. So I'm using that W3 first, and I find for the tail, rather than coloring each individual stripe, it's just easier to color the entire tail first with the lighter shades and then go over them with the darker shades on the sections that you want to be darker. Just saves you a little bit of time. So for the darker areas, the patches around the eyes and those extra stripes on the tail, I'm going to use W3, W5, and W7. I'm making sure to keep that W7 as far away from his eyes as possible so that they still stay nice and light and you can see his features, because otherwise they can get lost if you color them too darkly. So I use that W7 first and then blend it out with the W5, and then I'm coming in with the lightest shade, the W3, right over the areas where his eyes are, and then also adding a highlight on the right side of his tail. Then I'm going to move to my red squirrel, which just happens to be my favorite animal. And I'm going to use E13, E15, and E17 for him. I really love these shades for red squirrels because they have that brown, earthy tone to them, but they also have that reddish orange tint. I think it just works really beautifully for these critters. Sometimes I'll go a little bit darker and add in E18, but I decided to go a little bit lighter. The critters were kind of lighter in general, so I wanted to keep them all kind of in that same tone, you know, not going too dark with their fur. So I started with the E17, again, flipping my shadows like I did for the opossum. He's facing toward the left, so his shadows will go on the right. Blending out with the E15 and then use the E13. And then I wanted the lower part of his face to be just a little bit lighter, so I brought in the E11 for that. I'm going to move on to my bird. I decided to do a bluebird. I went back and forth. I almost did a robin, but I thought the little pop of blue would be pretty to kind of break up all of these neutral tones for the rest of the critters. So I went with some pure blues. I sometimes will use like a blue-green, but I decided to use just the blues today. So B00, B01, and B02. And then for the belly, I'm going to do RV10 and RV11. So we'll have like an actual bluebird with the pinky red breast. And then I'm going to give all of my critters some rosy cheeks and color the insides of the ears when necessary on anybody. So just using that RV11 first and then blending out with the RV10 when it's needed. I'm also going to use these shades to go over the opossum's belly and tail, just to add that little bit of pink to them like I mentioned earlier. And for the bear and the red squirrel, the RV11 wasn't quite dark enough. So I am going to add in the RV13, and I'll just go back over those a little bit to make them just a bit brighter. I did it, I guess, on some of the other critters as well, just to kind of make them all a little bit more consistent, and then blend it out with the RV11. My RV13 has always been a bit of a leaky marker, so that's why you see that kind of pink patch underneath the cap. I do usually have to work quickly with it, and sometimes I will take off the other cap on the end to equalize the pressure in the barrel and just keep it from leaking, but usually if I work quickly with it, I don't have a problem. So I'm going to keep using that. I'm going to do the cherry on top of the cupcake, and then I'm going to do 2 of the pennants in this little banner. I ended up going with the one on the far left and the one on the far right. So putting that RV13 on the right hand side for a shadow, blending toward the left with the RV11, and then the RV10 for highlight. I'm also going to do the party hat with these shades, but this time I did the shadows on the left hand side because this is going to go on the bear's head. It's the bear's birthday today in the card that I'll be making. And then I'm also going to do the bow on the little gift with these shades as well. Then I decided to pull in more blue tones so that the bluebird wouldn't be the only pop of that shade on the card, but I wanted to deepen it up a bit, so I went with B01, B02, and B04. I'm going to do the center pennant in that little banner, and then I'm also going to do the little bow You can do it as a bow or as a little bow tie. In this case, it's going to be a bow tie for our bear who's going to be dressed up for his party. And then I'll also do the cupcake wrapper on the cupcake. Just putting the shadow at the bottom and the highlight at the top. And then I'll also do the box on that round shaped gift, which is from Cake Time. I think it's a really fun, cute little box there. So I'm just putting my shadows on the bottom of the lid and up under the bow, and then blending down on the lower part with the lighter shades. And again, just coloring everything with a second layer off screen so it smooths out the blend and just increases that depth and saturation. For the rest of the pendants and the frosting on the cupcake and the pom-pom on the party hat, I decided to go with kind of like a creamy shade. I used E40 and E41 and then let the white cardstock show through for the highlight. And then for the two little leaves, I'm using YG00, YG01, and YG03. Then I'm going to take a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and get that started off to the side. And I'll go over the eyes of my critters. This is an extra step, but it does make them nice and bright and shiny and just really brings them to life. So it's something I almost always do. And that is going to finish up this first panel. So we'll switch to the other. For the tree, I have stamped it the long way because it is a long image. It's meant more for a slimline card. I'm going to be making a standard size card today though, so I did modify it. I am stamping the bottom section so it will fall behind the grass line so you won't see that little cutout. There will only be two in my little scene. Use the same greens on the leaves, and then for the rest of the tree, I'm going to go back to my E40s, which I used for the creamy tone little accessories, but I'm going to go a bit darker. So I'm using E43, E44, E47, and E49. And I'm going to start by coloring in these two little holes where I'm going to have some critters sticking out. So I use E49 at the bottom, and then I'm blending up with the E47. Just carrying that up. I wanted it to be fairly dark behind them, so it'll really help them to pop. And then I'm going to use E44 and just take that up most of the rest of the way, leaving a little bit of area at the top for the highlight, which is going to be the E43. And then I'll just fill that in. And this time I didn't bother going over with a second layer in those little holes because they will be mostly covered up by the critter that will be in front of them. And because it's kind of like a wood texture anyway, it doesn't matter if the blend is entirely smooth. Then I'm going to move on to the rest of the tree. And I'm starting again with that E49. And I'm going to add some shading on the right hand side of the tree. There is no left-hand side of the tree. The die only cuts out the right-hand side, so you can kind of move it and adjust it how you want, or make the tree end with your own coloring on the left-hand side where you want it to. So I just kind of drew in a side on the left with that darkest E49, and then I started to blend everything out with the E47. I'm going to bring that down on the left-hand side as well, and like I said, I'm not being really careful with it because it's okay if there's a little bit of irregularity in the coloring because it adds to that wood grain texture. So I'm moving to the E44 and just bringing that color up from the bottom. You're never going to see that bottom section. Like I said, it'll be behind the grass, but I didn't know where exactly it would end, so I just colored it in with that E44. And I also added a little bit of extra depth underneath the holes with the E44. And then I'm switching to the E43. And it was at this point that I realized that there was still quite a bit of area left, so I am going to end up bringing in a fifth shade. It's a large image, so it doesn't hurt to have an extra shade in there to just add that bit of depth. So I'm going to switch to the E42, bring that in, and I'll add a little bit of that to the top of the branch and then fill in those remaining sections. And I did do a second layer on the outer part of the tree just to help it blend a little bit more. I just felt like it was a little too patchy and didn't really look super wood grainy, so I did flick in a little bit of extra color with the side of my marker nib to kind of just soften it a bit more. So now that I have all of these images done, I'm going to trim them out with the matching dies and then switch to my background. I'm going to ink blend with some Distress Oxide inks onto a panel of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock. For the sky, I'm using Broken China and the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil. So I'm going to start on that stencil and press down firmly and then kind of get softer as I leave the stencil, so I get kind of like a hazy look. I think that just adds to the clouds and makes them look soft and pretty and kind of like a dreamy little scene. Then I'm going to come down a little bit farther, turn that stencil so I get a different cloud formation, and continue working my way down the panel. I haven't used Broken China that much in a while, but I think the bluer tone of it kind of ties in with the Bluebird. That's why I decided to go with that particular blue rather than, say, like Salvage Patina, which is like my new favorite for clouds, but it would have been a little bit too blue-green, where the Broken China is a bit more of that true blue tone. And then at the bottom, I'm going to just add a little bit of extra color so those bottom clouds aren't so stark white and they have the same dreamy look. And then I wanted to add a bit of splatter detail to give it a bit more interest. So I'm going to press some ink onto an acrylic block, add some water to make it a bit more fluid, pick that up with a thin paintbrush and tap that all over the background until I'm happy with how it looks. So just getting a little bit of dots here and there, and then once I'm happy with it, I will set this panel aside to dry. For the grass, I used the Grassy Knoll die from Hello Bluebird and die cut another piece of Bristol, and I'm going to color this one in with some Twisted Citron at the top. Just being a bit careful because I don't want to bend those grasses, but they're a little bit shorter, so they're not as easy to bend as some dies are. And then I'll use Mowed Lawn down at the bottom. Just bring that up, covering up some of that Twisted Citron so that we get a nice blend between the two, and then go back to the Twisted Citron to smooth that out even further. And then just like with the background, I'm going to add some splatter detail. So I'll press some of the Mowed Lawn onto an acrylic block and repeat that process, just picking that up with the paintbrush and then tapping it all over the background until I'm happy with how it looks. And then I will set this panel aside to dry as well. I wanted to give that tree a bit of dimension so that when I put my critters in the holes, it really looks like they're kind of popping out. So I have added some foam tape to the back of that, and now I'm taking that little possum and I'm going to hang him down from the back side of the tree, and then take the little extra tail piece and add that over top with some liquid glue so it makes it look like his tail is truly wrapped around that branch. I think that's so clever and a really, really fun addition to this Tree Neighbors stamp set. Once I've got him attached, I'm going to continue adding the foam tape along that branch, just trimming it down as needed. I like to have my images really well supported. I do send out a lot of my cards, and I want to make sure that nothing ends up bent in the mail and then, you know, it just doesn't look the way that you intended it to. So I trim down little pieces and make sure that every little branch and leaf is supported, because I just want to keep it, you know, as protected as possible as it goes through the mail. And then I'll also cut down a few little bits to go on that possum so he will be at the same level as the tree. Then I can start to peel off those release papers, and there's quite a lot of them, so I usually keep a little dish off to the side so I can just collect them all and then dump it straight in the trash. And once I have all of that ready to go, I'm going to line that tree up with the left side of my scene. Make sure that it is on there nice and straight. Just take my time lining up the left side and also the top. The bottom doesn't matter quite as much because that will get covered up, but then I can press it down into place. I'm going to add a little piece of foam tape into that bottom hole to make sure that the grass is supported, figure out where that's going, and then also add a piece of foam tape over on the right hand side. And then I can peel off that release paper. I'm going to add a little bit of liquid glue so it will also adhere to the part that is on top of the tree. I even added a tiny little piece there on the right to make sure that was well supported as well. And then just line that up with the bottom of the scene. So now you can never know that this tree was meant to be anything other than as it is. So I'm going to add some liquid glue into those empty holes and then just press the little dark pieces in there so that they look a bit more recessed. And then I can bring in the rest of my images and start to decorate the scene. I wanted to make sure that my critters that were going in those holes looked like they were supposed to. So I'm going to add the raccoon in the top one, and then in the bottom one I'm going to have the bunny. So just adding that, and there's like a little piece on the belly that you can kind of tuck behind to make it look even more like he's popping out of the tree. Take that banner and I'm going to hang that from the branch across the base of the tree, going from the right to the left at a little bit of an angle there. And then I was going to continue with my critters, but I realized I should probably work on my sentiment before I start filling things in too much, because I knew it was a fairly tight fit. So I'm going to pause on adding any more critters and stamp my sentiment. And I'm using the birthday script stamp set. I'm going to stamp that with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink down the right hand side of the card. And I'm doing the one that says, "A little birthday wish with lots of love." I'll stamp that down twice to make sure it's dark and bold. And then I will pop my card base in my MISTI while I have that out. I'm going to use some Lawn Fawn peacock cardstock and peacock ink to match. And I'm taking a critter from Cake Time that is eating some cake with a little party hat. And then the sentiment is also from Birthday Script. I stamped the entire thing twice and then the little bunny a third time to make it a little bit bolder. And then I'm going to adhere this card front to the card base using some liquid glue. Again, just kind of pinching those corners and making sure that they are nice and straight. And then I can go back to adding in the rest of my images. So I didn't add foam tape to anything ahead of time because most of them only needed it in little bits and pieces, and some of them didn't need it at all. I'm only adding foam tape where the critter is going above the grass line or the tree line, so that everything is on the same level, which makes it really nice for mailing. So I put a little foam tape behind the bear's head and then used liquid glue for the rest of him. I'm using just liquid glue for the red squirrel. And you can see that I smeared a couple of those dots that weren't quite dry in the background. So I just adjusted the red squirrel to cover that up. And then I'm going to have this little birthday present hanging out of the bunny's hands. I think that's really cute to just tuck there. And the red squirrel is going to be holding the cupcake, so I'll add that to his little paw, making sure that the cherry stem doesn't cover up his nose. And then I'm going to take the bluebird and add some foam tape to the back of that and pop him up on the branch, kind of between the possum and the raccoon. And then I'll add some more foam tape to the rest of the images that need it. So it's going to go on the party hat a little bit, just making sure that it's short enough that I can still add it on top of the bear's head and keep it level. And then also these two little leaves, I'm going to add a tiny little piece behind those as well. So the leaves I'm going to have kind of coming down around that sentiment, just framing that a little bit more and integrating it into the scene. And then the party hat I'll add on top of the bear's head. And again, I did have to trim the foam tape down just slightly so that it could overlap. So it just looks, you know, more natural, like it's actually sitting on top of his head. And then I'm going to give him the little bow tie, and I'll just use some liquid glue for that. And I think you could put that on either the left or the right. I just thought it looked cute over on the left-hand side, like it was knocked a bit askew. Then I'm going to take a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen. I just wanted to add a few extra details to some of the accessory images. So I'm doing little white polka dots on the pink and the blue pennant banners. I'm also going to add white polka dots to the blue gift, actually to the pink ribbon on the blue gift. And I'll do it on the bear's party hat as well on the pink part. Just a little extra detail. Again, something that you don't have to do, but just adds a little extra something to the scene. So once I'm done with that, I also wanted to add a bit of glitter. So I'm going to grab my favorite Stardust Stickles, and I'm going to put that on the white parts of the little accessory images. So on the frosting for the cupcake, and then on the pom-pom on the party hat, and on the white pennant banners. And I did fill those in completely. I just wanted them to be nice and sparkly since I only had a couple little pops of it on the scene. And then I wanted to add a few little hearts. I'm going to use these little heart glitters from Studio Katia. I'm dumping them into my Twiddler's Nook embellishment tray. And then I'm just going to add some little dots of liquid glue. I'll pick them up with my embellishment wand from Studio Katia and just press them down into place. They're a subtle accent, but I think it ties in with the sentiment because it says with lots of love. So having those little kind of hearts in the background, I think just adds to that theme. And plus they're really pretty when they catch the light. They have such a soft shimmer to them. And yeah, I think they're nice. So I'm just adding those, and then if I need to straighten them out, I use the other end of the wand to just adjust them slightly. And that is going to finish this one up. I will lift that up so you can see how that sparkle catches the light between the little hearts and the stickles, and give you another peek at the inside. I had so much fun creating this card and visiting Tree Neighbors once again. This is one of my favorite stamp sets from Hello Bluebird, so I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. All of the products I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below, and if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought might also interest you. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.